Well, good morning to all of the For the Many listeners. Today is an unusual day because I am divorced from Ian Dale. But the good news is that very quickly I found myself a new bloke. So warm welcome to Tim Montgomery. Hi, Tim.
Thank you. Does this mean we're married then? If you divorced Ian, are we now an item, Jackie?
We're an item, yeah. I think we'd better say we're engaged because there's still quite a lot of discussion about the wedding and the arrangements that I think we're going to have to do before we're properly hitched.
I probably should tell my mum then. She'd be quite surprised to learn this.
Having said that, though, I'm really not quite sure that you're the man for me because, as I pointed out, I think last week or the week before, because I'm having to do the technical stuff today, so that if anybody can actually hear this, that's because I have succeeded in following Ian Dale's very clear instructions, and I've pressed record at the right moment and managed to download it and send it to Kat and all the other stuff that I'm going to have to do. But I made a mistake, didn't I, of suggesting that you may not be a man who was good with technical things, and you've told me that you want to defend yourself. So go on, off you go. I claimed you wouldn't know what a spanner was.
Well, I made a bigger, more fundamental mistake, Jackie, is when Ian asked me to stand in for him. This is a terrible confession, but I wasn't a regular listener to this podcast. And I hadn't quite realised how smutty you and Ian were. And so what I did do a little bit of late homework and listened to the show, thought what to expect. And what did I discover as I was listening? You questioning my manliness and saying that not only did you have to take care of all the technical stuff, but you didn't think I'd be good around the house. It was with a spanner, wasn't it? You said you couldn't imagine me. Yeah. So I feel I shouldn't really be taking part, seeing you've trashed my reputation.
Yeah, but I noticed
the listeners before I've even started.
I noticed that you haven't claimed that you really are very good with a spanner there, though, Tim. So I've got you right, haven't I?
What is a spanner exactly?
Yeah, precisely. And I've realised now that I'm in charge of the recording that actually a spanner doesn't appear to come into it, just a laptop. So all in all, I think we're going to be fine. Tim, just before Go on.
Yeah. Can I make another complaint, though?
Oh, blimey. You're turning into a difficult one. You've only just started. Go on.
I woke up this morning and thinking, well, I'm standing in for Ian Dale. You know, he's on some sort of holiday. And as I was listening to Radio 4, he's actually on Any Questions tonight, seeing we're recording on Friday, I should say that. And so Ian's holiday thing is not really a holiday, is it?
You know Ian, Tim. I know Ian. Our listeners know Ian. He'll be listening to this, so we should say nice things about him, but we won't bother. The point about Ian is that he never takes a bloody holiday. He's not doing Good Morning Britain, so I got to be on this morning with Jeffrey Archer, He tells me he's 81, but I tell you, the man is full of beans in a slightly bonkers way, but quite sweet. And so he's not doing that. But you're right, he's doing Any Questions this evening. And if you haven't heard it by the time this goes out, because we should be putting it out on Saturday morning, I think you can re-listen to him on Saturday lunchtime. But he'll be flipping well blogging, he'll be tweeting, he'll be doing all of that stuff. So I think you and I, Tim, should tell Ian that he really needs to take a proper holiday this time.
I think his partner John has probably been telling him that for years, and if John doesn't have any impact,
we're not going to.
No.
All right, you're right. Now, Tim, just before I tell people what we're going to do, just briefly introduce yourself. Could you just give us your credentials?
I don't think I have any credentials for this podcast. I suppose my main credential for this podcast is we better not reveal the other members of the Martini Club because it's a private gathering. But we're part of a little gathering, aren't we, Jackie, that meets in... our first meeting was in a very nice hotel. And I think we got into Martinis because of our shared love for a certain old-fashioned detective series.
We did, yes. We are You're right. Yes, we'll come on. We'll talk about that a bit. Actually, we should have said we'll talk about that. Yeah.
But I suppose I've known Ian now for a very long time, and I set up the Conservative Home blog, and he used to run Ian Dale's diary, and there was a sort of a period in the sort of mid 2005 onwards when Guido Fawkes' Conservative Home, Ian Dale's diary, sort of were quite fashionable and talked about. I think we did a little bit to challenge the existing media system, and we were championing sort of a rise of conservatism at that time when David Cameron was, getting the Conservatives back into government after a long period in opposition. And so I'm afraid I'm another Tory, which I suppose is why I'm been selected to balance your left-wingery, Jackie.
My left-wingery. But you've also been in, relatively recently, you've been in government, you've been advising, haven't you?
Yeah, I was very briefly Boris Johnson's social justice advisor. And but a character called Dominic Cummings, I don't know whether you've ever heard of him.
No, who's he? Who's he? That's politics, yeah.
He and I had a slight difference of opinion about how Number 10 might be configured. I could see that Dominic Cummings, for me, has always been a brilliant individual in many ways, but you just don't want him in charge of anything. You don't want him dominating the heart of government. And he has many good ideas, but you need someone to tell him that idea is rubbish. And he just took over Downing Street, and I was warning. Well, I said to Boris I didn't think it would work. I urged him to try and bring some more grown-ups into his team, and clear my advice was rejected, and so I decided not to stay in Boris's orbit.
But you went, and then Dominic Cummings went as well.
Yeah, a little bit later.
Is it better for that?
I think Number 10 is better, but perhaps this is a topic we should discuss today. But I think we're beginning to see some pretty serious signs of decay in the Boris Johnson government.
Well, I'm going to stop you. I am going to stop you at that point, and I will say what we're going to...
I like it when you're strict.
I'm going to keep you in order. I was a chief whip at one point.
I do know that, yeah.
Anyway, whips for later. We
Oh, God, this is gracious. What have I let myself in for? And agreed to this.
Indeed. Today, we will touch on the Johnson premiership. Is it losing its shine for the public? And his mine closure comments from yesterday. We'll do a little sort of COVID catch-up, probably touch on travel traffic lights and whether or not I'm going to get to go on my holidays. We'll touch on the Olympics. We might mention Rishi Sunak's government-funded insurance for festivals and other events. Is Alok Sharma a perfect example of one rule for them and another rule for us with his air travel to red list countries? Should we be teaching Latin in schools? How many men have I lured to my caravan in the last month?
Yes, I saw about that. What have you... These were young. I think we should start on this, actually. For those who don't know, the sort of young Irishmen seem to get lost near the location of your caravan, and you didn't hesitate to jump on this opportunity to lure these young men, or attempt to lure these young men into your lair, did you?
But Tim, I have been featured on Thought for the Day on Radio 4 today, apparently.
Really?
Yes. So just to sort of fill people in if they don't know the story, you sort of got it right. So there's a young man called Paul McCurlin, and he came with a group of friends from Ireland to walk in Snowdonia. The first day they got there, he had a positive COVID test, so they couldn't stay in the campsite that they were supposed to be staying in. So he tweeted, and it was brought to my attention by a listener to the For the Many podcast, actually, who said, isn't your caravan near here? So I sort of tweeted this guy and said, look, where are you? And he said he was in Dolgethley, which is quite near to my caravan. And I said, because, I'm a decent human being. I've got sons myself that age. It's not what some people are suggesting it is. And I said...
Did you mention at this point as well about what you mentioned to me a few minutes ago, that you'd be the chief whip and... and other facilities that you might be able to offer as well as a caravan?
I think he knew who I was. Do you know who I am, I said, and would you like to stay in my caravan? As it happened, he never ended up in my caravan because
he had a lucky escape.
Yes, because he'd got I think a friend of his father's came and took him anyway. But because it had been on Twitter, somebody from, I think, the Derry Post picked up on it and did a news story, and then the BBC in Northern Ireland picked up on it, and I actually did an interview with BBC Radio Foyle on earlier on this week, and then we was on Thought for the Day. I think because I didn't hear it, other people reported it. I think because it was a sort of, Good Samaritan-y type thing that not just me, that lots of people had offered for him. Anyway, listen, I've got to do it.
What is it, though, with former Labour cabinet ministers and caravans and things? You and Margaret Beckett, and how many of you all have? Do you get a sort of caravan issued by the Labour Party, or is this your own caravan?
That would be a good idea. No, I mean, famously, of course, in the 2010 election, was it? The women MPs had a pink van that they drove around in. Do you remember that?
Was that Aisha Hazarika?
Yeah, Aisha was. I think Aisha was part of that because it was Harriet Harman, I think. Harriet Harman's idea. Listen, it got a lot of flack, but it was a good idea because it got out and about to women voters and took women MPs and other campaigners all around the country. So that was great. Right, now listen, shut up, Tim, because if Ian is listening to this, he'll be going, she should have done a clap by now. She should have done a clap by now. Because, of course, I have to do a clap and then we probably get a commercial break and then we come back again afterwards. All right. You won't hear the clip.
I'm told.
Others will hear it. You won't hear it. Right, so ready? Right, we are back, and I am just downloading to make sure that I don't lose any of it. Ian, you see, I'm following all of your good advice.
What listeners, of course, don't know is that this actually is the fourth time we've recorded this podcast. We've done this, 3 times already, and this was the only one that actually recorded, but...
Listen, do not tempt fate, for goodness sake. There have been a very few occasions where Ian has messed something up in the recording and we've had to do it again. I mean, we haven't had to do that for a long time, but it is quite torturous because obviously you think you're hilarious and fresh the first time you do it, and then the second time, it's an absolute nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, listen, let us come back to the issue of... the Prime Minister, who presumably, because you were willing to go and advise him, you support. How's he doing, Tim?
Well, look, he defeated Jeremy Corbyn. He got Brexit done.
Not a difficult job.
Theresa May couldn't manage it. Well, just about.
Well, she did, though. Oh, my God, you sound like a Corbynite. You think you're going, 2017, Jeremy Corbyn won. No, he didn't win. That's the problem.
He didn't win, but neither did she, really, did she? She lost her majority. So, if he wasn't... people now say he was easy to defeat, but, he actually didn't do too bad. What was it? Got 40% in the 2017 general election. Just about 3 or 4 points short of Theresa May.
There is no silver medal in general elections, though, is there? That's the problem.
Piers Morgan would approve of... Piers Morgan, by the way, unblocked me this week. That's my
is that a good
great
thing?
News of the week. I don't know whether it is or not, but I made the mistake of pointing out that he'd been a little bit hypocritical on COVID once, because he was a real COVID hawk, wasn't he? And
he was.
And then he defended his son when he went on a Black Lives Matter march in the middle of the COVID lockdown. And I said, is this entirely consistent? And I was blocked. But he unblocked me this week because I did a little video and said, should he be hired by GB News? And I think he approved of getting a little bit of attention.
Oh, for goodness sake. A little bit of attention. He lives on attention.
But Boris, so he did those 2 big things. Apart from the vaccine, though, I'm not entirely convinced he's handled the pandemic that well. And there just seems to be a dysfunctionality in number 10 Downing Street that got a little bit better after Dominic Cummings left, but fundamentally it just doesn't seem to be a particularly good operation. And when he was Mayor of London's obviously a much smaller job than being Prime Minister, but he did run it reasonably well, partly because he had good people around him. First of all, Simon Milton, who died far too young, but he was a brilliant leader of Westminster Council. Then had Eddie Lister, who, when he was in his prime, was a pretty dynamic leader of Wandsworth.
But he went into number 10 with him as well, didn't he?
He did, but never really in charge. He didn't really want to do it. He went in because Boris asked him, and but there's never been the proper operation that any Prime Minister needs. But particularly when you are Boris, you need that, those competent people around you to compensate, for some of your own weaknesses. Boris is a brilliant leader in many respects. He can connect with people like no one else can. People just want a selfie with him. That's the first thing that you just notice whenever you walk down the street with Boris or he goes into a room. He can communicate complicated messages in ways that connect with people. He can inspire people. He can lead. I think he's a Eurosceptic Heseltine in many ways. I think he's raided Labour territory and discombobulated you and your party.
Yeah.
But he's just not a good governor, and he hasn't got a good team around him. And I don't think he's picked the best people in his cabinet either. So, who could have made up for some of his shortcomings.
That's a really good way of putting it, actually, the distinction between government and sort of leadership, because regular listeners to the podcast know that I am both enormously exasperated and angry with him, and also a little bit confused about why he continues to be so popular. I accept that, and I don't quite get it. But I think that is the problem, isn't it, that he can connect with people, he can get attention, but one of the reasons that I really get angry with him is because I think he's irresponsible with the responsibility of government. We talked a few weeks ago about the Levelling Up speech, which is supposed to be at the sort of heart of his domestic agenda, and he just acted as if he wasn't really that bothered. He hadn't really given it a lot of policy thought. In fact, nobody had, and it didn't really hang together. But yesterday, of course, he did that typical Boris Johnson thing when he was up in Scotland talking about climate change action, and he made this sort of, was it off the cuff comment about how we'd got a head start because Margaret Thatcher had closed all the coal mines in the 1980s, and wasn't this great, and he even knew as he was doing it that this was going to get a reaction, because he said, that'll wind people up, or words to that effect, didn't he? So and of course it did. And I don't know whether or not that was planned. I mean, it was crass in my opinion. It was wrong because, of course, Margaret Thatcher didn't close coal mines because she thought we needed to move out of fossil fuels. She closed them for other economic reasons, and of course didn't put in place what was necessary to protect those communities. So you can understand why some of those red wall Tories in the north representing mining seats are a little bit less than chuffed this morning about it.
One Tory MP messaged me, Jackie, and said, I wonder if he said that to divert attention from the Dominic Cummings latest intervention, when Cummings alleged that Boris had said that Carrie was driving him crackers. Carrie is his wife. Oh. And because there is this, what is it called? The dead cat strategy, put something on the table to stop people talking about what you fear they might talk about. But my goodness, if that was his strategy, it certainly backfired, because, well, as of today, Friday, most of the front pages have got this story there, much more damaging than another Dominic Cummings Carrie allegation. And of course it was in Scotland as well, where Boris is already seen as a little bit of a buffoon, and the union's in danger. You don't want to go up to Scotland and make a gaffe like this. You're right to talk about the red wall, the problem it could have in red wall seats, but of all places to do it, where Scotland's not had Scotland wasn't that keen on Thatcherism, was it, if I remember rightly?
True.
And
Well, are you? I mean, Ian Dale, of course, is a massive Margaret Thatcher fan. Are you a massive Margaret Thatcher fan?
Well, when I'll tell you how I became a Conservative, if this is
go on,
of interest to you. So you won't believe it, but recently I was 51.
No.
But at the age of, I think it was about...
That makes me a cougar, Tim. You know that, don't you?
We're back to you luring these young lads.
That's right. I have lured you not into my caravan, but into my podcast.
Anyway, well, Mrs. Thatcher lured me into conservatism when I was about 11. But we should stop these analogies now. I think we could go very wrong. But yeah, my dad was in the army. I was at a military school, and I remember a teacher telling me how evil nuclear weapons were. So this was sort of 1981 when the big nuclear Greenham Common thing was happening.
Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
You weren't at Greenham Common, were you?
I went to Greenham Common.
Did you really?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't living there and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But no. I was at university in Oxford and took a trip.
You commie. But the teacher said to me that nuclear weapons were evil. I went home to my dad, who was in the army, and told him how ashamed I was of him for supporting these evil nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And he introduced me to the idea of nuclear deterrence.
Yeah.
Went back to school the next day, hand up, told my teacher that perhaps it was a bit more complicated than she told the class the previous day. But then there was sort of this lady with big hair on the telly, and she was making the same arguments, and it was love from then on, really. And so, while at university other people had rock stars and that on their wall, I had a poster of Margaret Thatcher on my wall. So it's almost as bad as William Hague, isn't it? You know, talking about having copies of Hansard when he was growing up.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
You're
I shouldn't have
another
admitted that, should I?
And I think Ian Dale has already admitted to having a Margaret Thatcher poster. So you are another one.
We're too similar, aren't we? But university, I probably shouldn't. I was at university with Robert Halfon.
Oh, were you?
Sajid Javid.
Oh, I knew about Sajid Javid, yeah.
David Burrows, who unfortunately lost his seat at the last election, and Nicky Aitken, who recently gained one. So Robert Halfon had Margaret Thatcher slippers.
No way.
They were spitting image Margaret Thatcher slippers.
Right.
But yeah, he used to walk round our Hall of Residence wearing Margaret Thatcher slippers.
So which university was this, Tim?
Exeter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Greenwelly Brigade.
All very... I suspect there were probably a lot of Thatcherites at Exeter, weren't there? Probably still are.
Probably are.
That's me not being listened to by anybody from Exeter University anymore.
Did you have any... So apart from Greenham Common, did you have any... who did you have on your wall at university?
I was more left-wing then than I now am. But I also, and I was very politically involved and active.
Yeah.
I've changed my view on nuclear weapons, incidentally, since I went to Greenham. So who did I have? I'm not sure I had politicians on my wall. I may have had a sort of Che Guevara at some point or another in the sort of typical lefty student manner. I was a bit more. No, I was quite into music, so I probably had something like Robert Plant or something like that from Led Zeppelin on my wall.
You're a bit more normal than me, I think.
Yeah. Obviously.
How do you think Boris is doing? Do you see any signs of hope? Because you're a patriot as well as a partisan, and what would your advice be to him now if he rang you up and said, Jackie,
right.
What should I do next? And you can't say resign. If you actually wanted constructive advice, what would you say to him?
Well, I'm not sure I would know, because we are so fundamentally different. I always wanted to, when I was a minister, I always put a lot of premium, probably too much, arguably, on being really well prepared, reading all of my briefings, behaving sensibly, doing proper speeches, all of that type of stuff. And he is so far separated from that. So I think you have put your finger on it. I mean, he needs to get some people around him who are big enough to tell him what to do and to get things organised, and to make Number 10 and him look a bit more serious. Because the key point here, I think, is that sooner or later we're going to get politics back to normal again. There is no doubt at the moment, and you can see it, he knows this because he constantly reverts to it, that the vaccination programme he is gaining kudos and political support from having led in England the vaccination programme. And we can see the evidence of that because, of course, the last time there were elections, who did well? SNP in Scotland leading the vaccination programme, Labour in Wales leading the vaccination programme, Tories in England. So when that, the British public are fickle and they won't stay grateful, nor should they, for any length of time, and then we'll get back to proper politics, and then I think things will be less positive for him. And then he's got to be really careful that he doesn't make mistakes, like I think has really taken a bit of shine off him, which is when him and Rishi Sunak didn't isolate when they were pinged. I think what the polls are possibly suggesting is that has done him quite a lot of harm, because it plays into the one rule for them, another rule for us storyline. Don't you think?
I completely do, and I think it's always fatal for politicians, and that Alok Sharma is getting into trouble for that at the moment, for jetting around the world.
And is that fair?
Well, I have a slightly controversial view on this. I do dislike hypocrisy, but and I'm sure there's it's very hard to defend what he's done. But the reality is, I don't know whether you would agree with this, Jackie, just to being fair, is that to get the countries of the world to sign up to the climate change agenda is going to be tough. And actually, a lot of negotiation is about personal chemistry between the key players involved, etc. And it's very hard to really negotiate properly and get an agreement with people over a Zoom call. And I'm sure the dividend of him having face-to-face meetings, spending time with people, over dinner and not just informal talks, will probably have had a lot of benefits. But
listen, Tim, if I'm being completely fair, you've got a bit of a point, and
of a point. In terms of the Olympics of point scoring, is that a bronze, or is that, what does that translate to?
It's a bronze like you get in the boxing, where two people get a bronze because they haven't bothered to fight it off.
That's not very nice.
Because I do agree with you that, in my experience, there's nothing like being in the same room with another minister, and internationally, to get that sort of fellow feeling and to sort of look at the whites of their eyes and all of that. So I agree about that. But I just think in this case, because it's the climate change thing, it would have been naff to fly around the world anyway. But when you add in, going off to red countries and not isolating when you come back, and I think there's something about, he didn't come back and isolate and concentrate on it. He went off to primary schools and things like that. That was a bad call.
I definitely wouldn't defend that.
Yeah.
Have you seen this American, talking about hypocrisy, by the way, have you seen this American congresswoman who's been sleeping on the steps of Capitol Hill? She's protesting against the eviction laws, etc. But she's also one of that famous squad of left-wing, and she's a supporter of defund the police. But she's hired private security people to look after her while she's doing this camping out. And it's just, if you say one thing and you do another, and and her, she's social media about this, all people saying, we don't want police officers to defend me in my neighbourhood, that you'll buy private security. Why do these people do these sorts of things? They've got no sort of self-awareness.
Well, first of all, I do have to... I don't know why I defund the police, because in many ways I think it's a dreadful slogan at the very least. But of course it is actually about investing in essentially what Defund the Police is the tough on the causes of crime element of the tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Brilliant
so
slogan.
So on message.
It's why don't we shift resource to prevention as opposed to simply funding the police? Of course, that's what it's actually about.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. I mean, in politics, it's very difficult to recover from that hypocrisy charge, or it's a very potent charge to make about a politician, isn't it? That's the trouble.
And the government really have to be careful about it now. I think I don't think Donald Cummings is doing much damage to the government, but I think the reputation they're getting for saying one thing to the masses and doing another is a dangerous thing. And it's always been, the other element to this is the fundamental weakness of the Conservative Party throughout the ages, really, has been that, the party is seen as the party of the rich, party of the elite, party of the establishment. And this sort of hypocrisy charge is a really dangerous one if it really captures the public consciousness.
And to circle back round to Boris Johnson, I mean, what I find amazing about him is that he is so posh, Eton educated, posh, sounds posh, and yet he's somebody who has managed to cut through that sort of view of the Tory party. Otherwise he wouldn't have won, a Tory-led a Johnson-led Tory party wouldn't have won those red wall seats in the way in which he did. No. But watch this space.
It's the lad thing, isn't it? Partly the way he behaves badly, and he gets away with stuff no one else would.
You see, that's the other reason why I hate it, because I hate that sort of lads. You're right. I hate the way that he's treated women in his life. I hate the sort of way that some of the things that he's written just for sort of clicks on his columns. All of that stuff I find morally a bit reprehensible.
Yeah. And actually I think this is a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because I really believe it. But where I really got to know Boris quite well, Jackie, was up until the 2015 election. I met him quite regularly because, of course, there was the idea that Miliband might win that election against Cameron, and Boris was preparing, possibly to stand as Tory leader. I was working with him during those meetings and spent a lot of time at his house. He always arrived late. I was always punctual. It's part of what my military dad, enforced to me. And I spent quite a lot of time because his wife Marina was often there, and she was an amazing influence on him. She said to him when he would talk too much, stop talking, listen to what people are saying. She could talk to him and discipline him in, not in a chief whip way, but I was waiting for you to interrupt me at that point when I said discipline. You're being very well behaved.
I am, aren't I? I'm being very clear. Well, I don't want to scare you off, Tim, with some of the usual levels of smut.
Exactly. But, I think they had various understandings and he would often misbehave, but she was a real anchor in his life. And, I wish him only happiness with Carrie, but I just don't think don't probably have the same relationship that a wife that knew him back to front was able to give him. And I think that's part of the reason why he's not doing very well in Downing Street, actually.
Yeah.
And that's before looking at some of the, allegations that are made about Carrie's influence. Just assume Carrie is not, neutral influence. I think the loss of that family anchor is a big part of the problems we're seeing.
No, I agree with you. I suppose we should say congratulations to the Prime Minister and to Carrie for the announcement that they are going to be having a second child.
Absolutely.
And actually, genuinely, I think that the fact that Carrie has been willing to publicly talk about having had a miscarriage and how that made her feel is really important, because this is one of those things that happens to women, and it is a dreadful thing which you largely can't share with people. So good for her for having done that as well. Yeah, on that positive note, I will do another clap before we get carried away with positivity.
For the many
Right, we're back. We're being too nice to people, Tim. So who can we basically
We're also agreeing too much,
aren't we? Mind you see, people think I've become right-wing in my old age. They think Ian Dale's become totally moderate and soft in his old age. And you see, you're a bit of a softie. What can we disagree about? Are you do you think if Boris were to, fall under a woman tomorrow and have to resign, who would you be supporting to replace him? Is it the sunny Rishi Uplands that you want to see next in the Tory party?
Well, I mentioned my university chums, and I would always support Sajid if he stands again. Sajid, he's, we after we both left university, we moved in together into a flat in London, and so he is a really good friend, and I'm just loyal to him. I think he's brilliant, but it's not. I don't even have to think for a second. I'd be there to support my friend. I think he's a man of enormous integrity. We disagree on quite a few things on politics. Brexit not least. He backed Remain. I'm not quite such a Randian Thatcherite as him.
Yeah.
The aid budget, for example. Yeah, I'm a bit soft on certain things, aren't I? Yeah. But Sajid would definitely be my candidate. And I think whenever Boris does step down, I think it's a little bit like when the US electorate, they choose the opposite of people, don't they? Of the president they've got at the moment. They want the alternative. And actually, I think the country will probably want a sort of a competent, effective person, which I think is Keir Starmer's advantage.
Yeah.
As well. Keir Starmer shouldn't attempt to be like Boris. He, when the country's had enough of Boris, they will want the opposite of Boris.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And Keir is even gone up in my estimations this week because he's done a speech or an interview or something. Oh, I'm terribly don't forget, through all of the Corbyn years, I was very, very critical of my leader, but that's not my instinctive place. I'm a natural loyalist. And therefore, I'm very pleased to hear Keir this week saying we've got to praise what happened whilst Labour was in government and Tony Blair's leadership and all of this sort of stuff. And that is so overdue because, honestly, Tim, I would tear my hair out. Not only, almost you can understand Jeremy Corbyn wanting to slag off the Labour government, but, my criticism of Ed Miliband was always that there was a tinge of... let's distance ourselves from the last Labour government. Why would you want to take this approach of knocking on people's doors and saying, vote Labour, the last lot were pretty crap, but we'll be better this time round? It's just never going to work, is it, as a political tactic?
Well, you are completely right, but on what you just said about what Keir should be doing now, I agree that, Blair was the most formidable opponent the Tories ever had. He made a good part of my political life very miserable. But where I would disagree with you on Keir, though, generally, because you said you were a big critic of Corbyn, and you were, and you were principled to be that. But Keir served, in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet at a senior level, didn't really say anything against him. Then when he stood for the Labour leadership, he made that video, you might remember, which made a lot of his connections with Corbyn. And that, for me, is Keir Starmer's fundamental weakness. Who exactly is he? Is he the guy who served Corbyn? Is he the guy that traded on his Corbynistic sort of taking on the system? Or is he this guy that's now the Labour leader who's being all Blairite and moderate? And I think the voters smell inauthenticity, and I think that's Keir's number one problem. Yeah, stick at the competence thing, etc. But at some point, I think we need to know what's in his belly, what's his core, and I'm not sure I know that.
Well, one of the things that we've sort of quite often discussed about Keir is the extent to which he hasn't had a political background. I think I knew him when he was the DPP, when I was the Home Secretary, and it was quite...
Director of Public Prosecutions.
Sorry,
you're talking in your all me little
jargony acronyms. You're right. And I would
Although I'm sure the listeners are very intelligent, they probably didn't.
Yeah, don't patronise the For the Many listeners, Tim Montgomery.
I resign.
Oh no, actually, I think some of them are a bit slow. So we will.
The custom is always right.
Well, they're not paying anything, so why should I be nice to them?
I'm not being paid anything either, by the way.
No, true. Well,
Yeah.
it's all for love. It's all for love. What I was going to say about Keir, as I have said before, is he hasn't got some of those sort of political chops. He hasn't... I suppose, my problem is that I'm embedded in the Labour Party. I'm sort of, I know the factions. I know whose side I'm on and whose side I'm not on. And I've obviously had the sort of ups and downs of political life. He hasn't done that. And so in one way, what you could argue what he was trying to do was actually to rise above that factional thing and not to be a sort of tarred as a Blairite, and to try and bring the new people that are coming to the Labour Party with Corbyn along with him. In the end, you are right, though. You've got to set out where you stand and be clear about it. And hopefully that is the stage that he is now getting to.
Were you ever tempted, Jackie, say you were embedded in the Labour Party? I'm sure there's some smutty reference about embedded in the Labour Party there, but have you ever kissed a Tory, by the way?
I've kissed Ian Dale.
Have you?
Yeah. I think I've kissed you, Tim, haven't I?
Yeah, but only, you know what I mean. Kissed properly.
Have I had a snog with a Tory, is what you actually mean, don't you?
Yeah.
I don't believe that I have actually ever
knowingly
exchanged any bodily fluids in any way with a Tory.
But back to the question I was going to ask. People like Gisela Stewart and John Woodcock, Ian Austin, former Labour MPs who I think, out of principle, urged people at the last election, not to vote Labour. They walked away. They're all in the Lords now, funnily enough, coincidentally. I think all
good friends of mine, but yeah, carry on.
Were you ever tempted to much more publicly distance yourself?
No, because I couldn't do the vote Tory bit. I could never have done that. No, I mean, I found it really, really hard to vote Labour in both of the elections that he was leading. But I could not have, because genuinely, I didn't think a Tory government would be better than. I mean, I thought
not better than you really think.
I mean, it was really, really difficult. But first of all, I didn't think he was going to win. I mean, which is dishonest of me in one way, isn't it? Because had I thought he was going to win, I would have been much more worried about it, and I might have said more than I did. But I didn't want to, I didn't want to completely trash what I'd spent my life trying to build. That's a difficult thing, isn't it?
Why were you most worried about Corbyn? Was it the economics, or as a former Home Secretary, was it his sort of national security credentials?
I think it was his instincts.
The anti-Semitism, of course, or the alleged anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think it was anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I was trying to be. I was trying to be diplomatic. I don't know why.
The extent to which it was intentional, I suppose we could question. But when you keep being told that what you're doing is anti-Semitic and you don't do anything about it, then I think you're sort of verging into, to say the least, dangerous territory. I didn't think he was a very good politician. I didn't think that when the pressure came on, his judgment would be right. And it was round that I was very concerned about his approach to sort of foreign policy and where his instincts were. So, his instincts would always be anti-American. His instincts would be I felt, possibly leave our country undefended. The very fact that he couldn't bring himself to condemn categorically the Novichok attacks, clearly instituted by the Russians.
I'm sat here in Salisbury.
Well, exactly.
I live in Salisbury, so that issue, burnt deeply. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to do another clap. Okay, let's just I think we'll do a few more topics, and then we need to give our listeners the opportunity to ask some questions, because there are some specifically aimed at you, Tim.
I saw some of them. I wasn't, okay. Yeah. I'll brace myself.
All right. So, What do we need to say about COVID? I suppose I need to say that I'm feeling a bit more optimistic about my French holiday, given that France is now amber. So I won't need to quarantine when I come home. But I'm still feeling a little bit nervous about the direction that things could go in. And Grant Shapps has come under a fair amount of criticism this week for the, for apparently seeming to announce things and then briefing them, and then briefing against himself and briefing against the rest of the government. It's all looked a bit shambolic, hasn't it?
Has looked shambolic, and there's also the thing that sort of strikes me about the current situation is, I think a lot of the people that have acquired quite a lot of power during the pandemic, and fair enough, they needed a lot of those powers in the early stages, perhaps because we didn't quite know what we were up against. We didn't know whether COVID was the flu or, the bubonic plague or something in between. But why do they keep, the tweaking, moving country from one level to another? I just don't think enough information, enough facts on the ground are changing to justify the way they're trying to fiddle with the system all the time. I think they're just so used to acquiring power. And I felt that with the vaccination authority this week, changing their guidance on whether 16 or 17-year-olds should get the vaccine. 2 weeks ago it was no, suddenly it's yes. And am I being unreasonable in thinking that they're enjoying the control and the power a little bit too much?
I think you're being a bit unreasonable about that. I agree that the problem is that things keep changing. And I think there hasn't been, and when it comes to the travel things, I think there just isn't clarity. And, traffic lights were difficult enough because people were arguing about what does amber mean? Does it mean go or does it mean stop? But when you then have amber plus, amber minus, green minus, red plus, whatever it is, people have totally confused. Yeah. And then people start getting irritated because they go off on holiday not really knowing. I was on Good Morning Britain this morning and there were a family from Mexico, who essentially have got there and had to turn right round. I'm not enormously sympathetic to people who've gone off that far away when everything's as uncertain as it is at the moment. But then I'll get shouted down by people that say, you don't understand how desperate people are to go on a holiday. And I'm quite keen to go on one, so I got sympathy with that. On the 16 and 17-year-olds, the thing is that research has developed throughout the period. Remember, this was a vaccine that wasn't even made a year ago. So people are getting more information about it, about the risks, the benefits. And one of the sort of interesting, very worrying things that I heard this morning is apparently there are nearly 40,000 children who are suffering with long COVID. So the thing about young people is they don't get seriously, they're not hospitalised usually by COVID, but then they're getting long COVID. And remember, that is, headaches, muscle weakness, all of that stuff. So it's pretty serious if you get that as a young person. Yeah,
well, I don't know so much about that, but you make a good point. But I think what I object to, though, Jackie, is it's the way they move. Yes, perhaps positions need to evolve a bit, but they go from certainly don't vaccinate your kids, and now it's a big encouragement to do it. And I think when you flip in 2 weeks from, such certainty to the opposite, on the issue, I think that doesn't help the authority of, the people who are guiding us during this period. I think a little bit more nuance, a little bit taking the public into your confidence, really, and saying, these are the pros, these are the cons. But we just don't get that kind of subtlety. And I think that makes people who are, take a conspiratorial line and think there is a conspiracy, that gives them excuses and encouragement to think that they aren't really being respected, and then they sort of start getting nervous. So I think a little bit more of a treating adults as if they are adults might be a better way forward.
Interesting.
Where are you going in? Sorry, Jackie.
I'm going to the Dordogne, hopefully.
And what do you do on? Are you on your holiday? Are you someone? Well, obviously you'll be on the edge, sat outside your caravan luring young men into it. But
when I'm not doing that.
Are you someone who likes to sit on a beach and relax, or do you like going to museums and that every day?
No, so when I go abroad, I tend to go to a big house with my sisters and my mum and our partners and as many children as we can, who are now sort of in their late teens and 20s, that we can persuade to come with us, which usually means there has to be a very nice pool, which there is at the place that we're going to. So it tends to be a lot of... We will go out and about and look at things, but then there'll be quite a lot of big family meals and just generally relaxing and reading and things like that. It will be, if it happens, it will be absolutely lovely. Yeah. Now, what I was going to say before was, of course, one of the tactics that the government is now using to try to encourage young people to get vaccinated is this whole, you're going to miss out if you don't get the vaccine. And put that alongside, which... I'm sort of in two minds about that. I think it's marginally patronising. I tend to take the let's give people the, let's explain to people why it would be a good thing and trust them to do the right thing. Yeah. Having said that, of course, what we see in France is that when Macron said you ain't getting into clubs and restaurants unless you've had the vaccine, loads of people then took up the vaccine. So it may be that will work. And the thing I said we would touch on, which I think is pretty good news today, is this whole Rishi Sunak insurance scheme for festivals and concerts. So at least there will be more things that we can hopefully go out and do in the coming months. And then I think it is important that you say to people, if you ain't been vaccinated, you ain't getting in. And I'm not quite arguing for a vaccine passport, but I sort of am when it comes to...
You'd be arguing to become a bouncer with a voice like that, Jackie.
Your name's not on the list. Are you a festival goer, Tim? Are you a concert?
What do you think?
I suspect I never saw you when I was at Glastonbury, so I suspect possibly not.
I like the cinema, and I like holidays and all the rest, but I'm not really a big gatherings person. No.
See, I like to get in a crowd and sort of sway. I'm going to see.
Sway.
Well, that's.
Yeah.
Don't
you
forget.
Wave your hands
that's
in
my
the
dancing.
Air
There's a question about that later on. Okay, final thing before we move on to questions. I think you went to quite a poshish school, didn't you, Tim?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
People always assume I'm a Tory. I'm privately educated, but. No, I've never. I've always gone to a state school, but one thing that was different about my school, I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, was it was an army school.
Ah, yes.
And so a lot of the time I was in Germany, and another link with Ian.
Do you speak German?
Ein bisschen.
Oh, sehr gut.
But if a kid misbehaved in the school I was at, King's School, Gütersloh, their father, or usually was their father, would be called up in front of the commanding officer and told, your little Timmy's misbehaving. If you don't bring him under control, you'll be back in the UK by next weekend.
Really?
And so we had the school, it was a state school, but the discipline was just amazing. Kids really did behave. And so the blessing I had really to go to that school was, teachers could teach. There was no riot control needed because there really was that, real, basically expelled. Kids were sent back to the UK and their families. And,
Did you learn Latin?
No.
I did Latin for a term at my state school, my comprehensive, because the head teacher was a classicist and he wanted people to have the opportunity to learn Latin. So for that reason, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say that I could sort of see the point behind the government's announcement earlier this week that they were going to try to introduce Latin into some state schools, except that Gavin Williamson has been such an utter shambles as an education secretary.
When you started saying shambles, I thought you were going in a different direction.
He's been an utter anything you can think of that begins with that. That I can't really give him much credit. And it sort of feels like I've totally screwed up everybody's A-levels, GCSEs, teachers' lives for the last 18 months, but it's okay because we're going to offer Latin in a few schools. That's the feel it's got to me. Am I churlish about about Gavin?
I'm agreeing with you again. This is not going well. There's far too much unity. we should form a political party together, Jackie.
A sort of, what would we call ourselves? Soggy Centre.
As a man, I obviously would have to lead the party.
Of course,
you could be my deputy.
Well, I'm in a party which doesn't believe in having women as leaders, so that's all fine.
We had noticed that.
We are happy to have deputies, but I mean, please.
Well, you go around. Your women go around in pink vans. That's the status your women have in the Labour Party. I don't think I could see my heroine. Are you allowed to say heroine anymore? My hero. Margaret Thatcher in a pink van.
No, she loved that picture sticking out the top of a tank, didn't she?
Yeah, exactly.
That was her look.
You can imagine that's the clash, really. Margaret Thatcher in a tank, going head to head with Harriet Harman and you in a pink van. It wouldn't have ended well for you, Jackie.
But I'll tell you what, there were more of us. That's the point. We may not have managed to make one of us leader yet, but we have managed to get a fair more few into the cabinet and into leadership positions. That's my defence, Tim.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And you laid the groundwork for Theresa May, really, didn't you, to become Home Secretary?
Well, since I became the first female Home Secretary, there've only been a couple of little blips when they've allowed men to do the job, frankly. Your mate, the Saj, Alan Johnson. Who else have they allowed to do it?
I think that might
That's
be
it, isn't it? Because it was me, then it was Theresa, then it was Amber.
Amber plus or Amber minus? Oh, yeah, Amber red, yes.
And then red light spells danger, Priti Patel.
Who's the woman in the Labour Party you most admire? You obviously can't say yourself. That would be rude.
Oh, no. Well, what do you think I am, Tim? Honestly.
Obviously, that would be the answer everyone else would give, but yeah, you can't give it.
Well, clearly, having done the Honourable Ladies book with Ian, we got the chance to learn a bit more about some of the sort of earlier Labour women. So somebody like Margaret Bonfield, who was the first female cabinet minister, is brilliant. Barbara Castle, obviously, great hero. Margaret Beckett, I've always been a massive fan of Margaret Beckett. Let's not forget, she led the Labour Party for a short period of time.
Yeah, it wasn't real leadership. Harriet Harman led it on that ground.
That's what I mean. We occasionally let
you're allowed. The Labour Party seem to allow you to sort of undertake caretaker roles very briefly, but obviously a man has to step in very quickly afterwards.
You can just come in, do a bit of dusting in the leader's office, and then get out again so a bloke can come and do it. You're right, Tim. That's the approach we take.
Yeah. Is there a woman in the Labour Party now you think would be... If you could install a woman, I'm giving you the power now to install a female Labour leader. Keira's decided to go off and spend more time with his Arsenal. And
with his Arsenal?
What would...
well, I voted for Lisa Nandy.
She's great.
Yeah, I voted for Lisa Nandy. I mean, I think Rachel Reeves, is really good. Mm-hmm. I think Angela Rayner is a brilliant deputy, which is sort of damning with, not really damning with faint praise, but I do actually think she can be, if her and Keir get it right, it's got a sort of Tony, John Prescott vibe about it, which was a very sort of good partnership, actually. But of course, there are suggestions that it hasn't always been as
I understand they hate each
that.
other.
Well, you can't always believe everything that you read in the newspapers, Tim Montgomery.
I noticed that wasn't a denial, Jackie Smith.
I can neither confirm nor deny that there may be some beef at the top of the Labour Party.
My deputy leader is unassailable.
I'm going to fire her. Oh no, I'm going to give her lots of extra jobs instead.
I work for Reaction now, and I just interviewed Carolyn Harris, MP, this week, who was, until recently, Keir's PPS, and I think a little bit involved in some of the argy-bargy that took place. We won't go there. But I don't know whether you know her, but I interviewed her for Reaction and talked about her campaign to, she lost her son Martin at the age of 8. And, she's a dinner lady by background, and she didn't have the money to pay for the funeral. Had to borrow some money. Friends helped, make 4,000. And she campaigned for the government to, ensure that no other parent would have to worry about that who lost a child in future. She's got rid of the fixed odds betting terminals, and I think she's a remarkable woman. I'm not saying she's the next leader, but in terms of someone whose character, who's built cross-party alliances, who's managed to get change when there's the opposite parties in power, I think she's formidable, and she's so lovely. Yeah. And in the spirit of Ian Dale's Why Can't We All Get Along, I just encourage people, if they don't, Google the interview, because it just restore your faith that actually people in politics do work with each other sometimes across the aisle, and they really can get things done.
No, I think that's a really good point. I hate being in opposition, but what it has done is it's identified, and they are quite often women actually, it's identified people who can run those campaigns, who can build those coalitions, and who can make a change from opposition. And there are some really great characters who've done that. You're right. Okay, let us move on to some questions and to some listeners. So we've got a few birthdays. It's not at all naff, this podcast, Tim, but we have started doing that whole birthday thing. So, so I'm going to start.
It sounds a bit like hospital radio.
It is,
all of a
I tell
sudden.
you. Well, I record sometimes in my office at the hospital, so let's do the whole hospital radio vibe.
Can I congratulate you though, compared to last week, that you're not eating crisps?
No,
during this podcast, just taking your responsibility as technical director very seriously, aren't you, with this podcast?
Well, I suppose you're right. I slightly lead Ian a bit astray, or I lead him a sorry dance.
Don't think Ian needs ever
no, you're right,
to be led astray. No.
And I did listen back to it, and I was a bit ashamed of myself talking with my mouth full like I did at the beginning. So no, I have no food in front of me. But I could have a big slice of birthday cake and wish a very happy birthday to Keith Edwards from Walthamstow, who apparently is a big listener and a big fan. And his wife wrote into Ian, and so happy birthday to you, Keith. And tomorrow, one of our best and most famous listeners and contributors, Noah Keat, has his birthday. And I think he's probably going to be 20, because Noah is absolutely brilliant. He's already written a chapter in Ian's counterfactual Prime Minister Pretty and other things book. And he's a very, very good asker of questions for the podcast. So he very much deserves to... And
when you say tomorrow, do you mean tomorrow the day we're recording from, or tomorrow the day that actually people will start to listen to this?
Good point, Tim. You're thinking about our listeners.
I am.
I think it's Saturday the 7th. Is that the 7th of August? Yeah, Saturday the 7th of August is Noah Keat's birthday. So happy birthday, Noah, for that day. And we've got a question that sort of slightly links to him from another of our very good listeners, Nikki Larkin, who says, Dear Jackie and Tim, welcome to the For the Many pod team. I think that's for you, Tim. If or when your life is immortalised in film, she says, perhaps in a film written by birthday boy Noah Keat, who would you like to play you? Oh, have a lovely weekend, even though you'll be missing Ian Dale. We're not missing him at all, to be honest with you. He barely needs to come back. But anyway, go on. Who would play you, Tim, in a film in a For the Many pod film in which you make an important cameo appearance?
Who would play him? I think I should choose who should play you, and who should do it the other way around. But I don't know who should play me. But
you've got a Brad Pitt look about you, I reckon. I'm just saying that quickly before you say who's going to play me, so that you know that you've got to be nice.
I think I'll have to give you £5 or something in a brown paper envelope after the podcast for saying that. I don't know. Benedict Cumberbatch do? Because he played Dominic Cummings, didn't he, in that Channel 4?
Yeah.
So maybe he should play, more political people. Maybe he'll get...
He is very, very... Well, Michael Sheen plays everybody, doesn't he?
Michael Sheen is amazing. Yeah.
He is brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can have one of them then, in that case. Yeah. All right.
And who's going to play? Who would you like?
Oh, I've previously said I'd love Julianne Moore to play me, but I've gone a bit blonder since then, so... I don't know, Meryl Streep, although she's a bit older than me, just to be clear about that.
I did not like the way Meryl Streep portrayed Margaret Thatcher.
Oh.
I preferred who was the one? The the one who played her in The Crown. Gillian Anderson.
Gillian Anderson.
Anderson.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought she was a much better.
She did a brilliant job, didn't she?
Much better.
She did a brilliant job.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, well, whilst we're on the sort of celeb end of the spectrum, Pavita Corman says, with celebs starting to be announced for the new Strictly season. Are you a Strictly fan, Tim?
No.
Oh, bloody hell.
The only thing I really know... Well, I watched Strictly a bit when Anne Widdecombe was...
Yeah. Did you not watch me last year?
Hang on. Yes, I did. But the only thing I really know about Strictly Come Dancing is the time of the week never to ring my mum.
Yes.
Because she will... I think my mum loves me very dearly. That's what she says. But she says, never ring me during Strictly Come Dancing. She loves the programme. And I think I'd probably be disinherited if I actually rang her during that programme.
Well... In that
case, I do know from my mum that she did think you were very good. But that's the only thing I do know about your appearance on Strictly would have come from my mum.
Well, thank you to Tim's mum, because I was slightly worried when you said that, because I thought if she saw me on Strictly, she probably won't be in favour of us getting married, which, if you remember, we're going to, and we just need to get her blessing. But perhaps it will be all right after all. Anyway... Pavita says, who are you both rooting for? Well, obviously, you're not bloody rooting for anybody. And who would you love to see don the sequins? We're going to miss you shaking your tail feather, Jackie. Thank you. Well, I'm a big fan of John Waite, who I've appeared with on Steph's Packed Lunch, and he's been announced, the sort of chef. But he was on Bake Off, and he's lovely, and I think he's going to be part of the first... male same-sex couple, which obviously, there was the first female same-sex couple last year with Nicola Adams.
That didn't last long, did it? Because of COVID, was it? I'm trying to improve my
well done.
Popular culture credentials here just for a minute.
I mean, she lasted longer than me, I can say, but no, then she got COVID.
Then they had to be up.
Yeah. So, still more to be announced, but I think John will be great, and I've sort of got mixed feelings, because of course when they start announcing the new lot, then you realise your sort of history Strictly, and I had such a good time that I do feel a bit envious of the people that are being announced this year, but anyway.
Who did you dance with? Who was your partner?
Anton.
And he's becoming a judge, isn't he?
He realised that he could not top dancing with me. So he has become a judge this year, which I think he will be, well, I know he will be extremely chuffed about, so that will be lovely, and I think he'll be a really sweet judge.
Are you still in touch with him?
Yes, I am.
Nice, that's nice.
Yeah, it is nice. And so's Anne. Anne Widdecombe's still in touch with him as well. He keeps in touch. You see, that's the type of person that he is.
Yeah, that's good.
Right, Noah Keat question now. Because it's his birthday, he gets a question as well. He says, this week I watched Michael Cockerell's documentary on the Home Office, where numerous Home Secretaries argued that the Home Office said there was no way to prevent rising crime. Was this your experience, Jackie? And how can this be changed? Thanks for recording the day before my birthday. What do you think, Tim?
Oh, I think technology is the big driver of change in the war against crime. You saw it, with cars being made safer. I think CCTV has been a huge support to law enforcement. I think prison works. I do believe that the major years for the Conservative Party in the country weren't the most effective years, but I thought Michael Howard, realising that incarceration works insofar as such a large proportion of crime is committed by a small number of people. You take them off the streets, you may not reform them, you may not deter other people, but just taking high volume criminals off the streets does have an impact. So yeah, I think you can make a difference.
And of course, it was Michael Howard. I think the reference is rather more to Michael Howard, who reckons he will claim, possibly rightly, that he was the Home Secretary that essentially refused to accept the orthodoxy that you couldn't really do much about crime. And clearly, Labour Home Secretaries always believed you could, because they did, and reduced crime quite considerable, I have to say, whilst they were in government. So I suspect
there now follows a party political broadcast by the Labour Party.
And of course, since the Tories have been back in power, crime's gone back up again. But anyway, we will. I will let your prison works thing hang out there, and you can
prison
let my
works.
And because I'm not wholly convinced it always does, and certainly needs reform. And one of the, isn't it interesting that I think had Michael Gove stayed as Justice Secretary, he would have reformed. There would have been the opportunity to reform prison, and it's been a bit of a lost opportunity, I suspect.
I definitely think we should, after what I just said, I definitely think we need to be much more imaginative and bolder in trying to, educate prisoners. A lot of them, sadly, don't have great literacy or numeracy. There's a lot that can be done to try and reform prisoners, but that for me is not prison's main benefit and purpose. It is to just take people off the streets, and that I think does work. Would you agree?
There are certain people for whom prison is obviously absolutely the right thing to do. I do think the problem, there is an argument that we put too many people into prison, and therefore we're not able to do that rehabilitative education stuff that we should be able to do. So once again, I don't think we're miles apart on this, but I think there are quite a lot of people on short sentences who probably we should and could be able to find different ways of dealing with them in the justice system. But of course, then you've got to build people's confidence in that. And we discussed last week the sort of Priti Patel, Boris Johnson announcement about putting people in high-vis jackets when they're doing community sentences. That happened whilst I was Home Secretary, and one of the arguments for doing it was precisely so that people could feel confident that community sentencing was happening and that people were doing something meaningful, so that you could then say to them, look, everybody doesn't have to go to prison in order to, pay back to society, for example.
Yeah.
Martin Day says, will any of the excellent Team GB in the Tokyo Olympics be shortlisted for Sports Personality of the Year? Are you an Olympics fan, Tim? Have you been watching it?
Haven't been watching it that much. It's much harder, isn't it, given the hours of the... And one thing I'm sort of slightly bored with is, perhaps I should, being a Brexiteer, perhaps I'm part of the problem, but some might suggest, but there just seems to be an obsession with, on a scale I've not noticed before, just with how Team GB is doing. And there seems to be much sort of less coverage of generally what's going on in the Olympics. Certainly the news is all, they're always about how Team GB is doing.
Yeah, but that's because we're doing... You see, I'm sorry, I think you're lacking patriotism, Tim. I want to I want to be nationalistic and support my country in the course of the Olympics.
I'm not against supporting my country
you
continue to smear me. I knew this was a mistake coming on this podcast. Your Rottweiler questioning. No, but don't I don't ever remember just such a focus. Of course, I love Team GB doing well, but there's just so much about Team GB and not just generally about the sport that's taking place in what's the most important sporting occasion, in every 4 years in the world.
I suppose the thing is, because of the focus on Team GB, you don't get to see the sports that we're not in. So I was watching something last night, and they were talking about the climbing competition. I didn't even know there was climbing in the Olympics, and it was actually quite fascinating, but we're not really in it, so therefore we haven't seen much of it. And what's your view?
What do they climb?
Oh, it's really good. So they do 3 competitions. So they do a sort of sprint up a wall thing where they basically look like Spider-Man, and it's who can get to the top of this wall quickly enough. They're sort of climbing walls.
Are you watching the climbing, or are you watching men in Spider-Man outfits?
And that bit. Yeah. Then they sort of dangle off boulders and go sideways a bit. And then what's the other thing they do? Something where they basically have to climb really, really high, and the winner is the person that gets the highest. Yeah. So it was really interesting, as is. I mean, what's your view about all the sort of street urban sports that are coming into the Olympics? Are you are you getting down with the kids on the skateboards?
No,
of course you're not.
the BMX stuff is amazing.
Yeah,
absolutely amazing. And I would be terrified to do any of it, but I think it's been brilliant. And I don't often agree with The Guardian, but they were saying, this clearly, we should be building these facilities all over the country, and perhaps, building more of these facilities and putting a little bit less money into rowing. So yeah, I'm getting down with the kids, Jackie. I'm getting down with the kids. Yeah.
Well, when I was,
my impersonation of being down with the kids is better than your bouncer impersonation.
I think your impersonation has basically just demonstrated that you are very far away from the kids. Indeed, Tim. Your credibility is shot. Whilst I was the MP for Redditch, I supported the building of a BMX track in Redditch, which was appropriate because the very first...
another party political podcast.
No, just pointing out what a very good and effective constituency MP I was, and bigging up my constituency because it was the place where the first ever BMX
Not
race
your
happened.
Constituency anymore.
All right, all right. Blimey, rub it in.
Just hitting back.
Former constituency. God. This is the week when I've lost Jack Grealish from Aston Villa. I am in a state of some emotional turmoil, and you should be being kind to me. I did feel actually quite weepy last night about the announcement that he was off.
If I was with you, I would give you a cuddle.
Thank you.
It probably wouldn't be as nice as getting a cuddle from Jack Grealish. But I would give you a cuddle.
Thank you. Okay. I've got all a bit distracted thinking about who I would rather cuddle out of you and Jack Grealish.
Probably one of the reasons I missed you being on Thought for the Day earlier was because I actually began my day with a row on WhatsApp with Clive Myrie. Do you know Clive Myrie?
Yeah.
BBC newsreader.
Yeah.
And going to be presenting Mastermind soon. Lovely guy.
Yeah.
But I'm a Man United supporter and he's a Manchester City supporter. And I woke up to a message from him just saying Grealish, a smile.
Oh, that.
And then I hit back with, financial fair play's out the window, isn't it? What's it like being funded by a Middle East dictatorship? And it kind of went downhill from there.
Fair point.
But financial fair play has gone out the window. I would defend Man United, and I'm mostly a Man United supporter living in Salisbury, but I thought I'd say it before you did. But, Man United, at least when we were spending a lot of money, it was money that kind of came from within the Man United global family. it was money, it wasn't just from a very wealthy person who just poured money in. I find that with Chelsea, Glazers have taken money out of Man United. In contrast to the owners of PSG and Chelsea and City. So,
all right. I have to be.
Gets me a bit hot under the collar.
I can see that. And I can't go in too hard against Man United because Page 3 Boy is a Man United fan, so I do get lectured. And Page 3 Boy is the code for my new bloke, Tim. So I do get lectured about Man United quite a lot, but there is something about Man City buying success that is not how you wish football would be, is it?
No.
So
does your Page 3 Boy know that we're now married then?
Well, he will do.
Does he listen to the podcast? What did he say? What did he think of it?
It's quite often he'll go, Oh, Jackie, why did you have to say that? So I'll probably get a bit of that. Oh, Jackie.
Were you smutty before this podcast, you were. So Ian talk about you leading Ian. So Ian hasn't been the one that's led you astray.
No,
you've always been a bit saucy.
I was a bit, to be honest with you, even in the cabinet, I had a bit of a reputation for liking a bit of a jerk. I mean, it wasn't as smutty as it. Can you imagine Gordon Brown? Me making some comment about.
I can see that famous mouth drop occurring a little.
No. I've always liked to bring a little bit of levity to occasions and smutty if necessary. Yeah. Right.
I expect Theresa May would have done that when she was Home Secretary.
I bet Theresa May was a barrel of laughs. Right, here is another question. Dear Jackie, this is from Ed Abrahamson. Dear Jackie and Tim, and Ian, because there's no way you won't listen, he says, which is true. I don't know if I should be happy or sad. Went to Boots to pick up a prescription. I took out my credit card. Oh, no, you don't need to pay anything, she said. Confused, I asked why not. She leant forwards and through her mask whispered, "It's free at your age." My question, having just turned 60 and self-employed earning a decent income, should I be getting medication free? Let's see if we can disagree about this, Tim.
Okay, I'm gonna. The inner Thatcherite's going to come out now, I think. So maybe we will disagree, Jackie. But I am a bit of a lockdown sceptic.
Are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, and I think when we didn't know the full nature of COVID at the beginning, I supported lockdown. At Christmas time, when the NHS I think was close to being overwhelmed, I supported lockdown. But generally, I think we've been far too cautious about this virus, and I think why I'm a sceptic is because I think the long-term implications in terms of mental health, kids falling back in their education, a whole range of things are going to be enormous. The NHS, the waiting list. I'm very hesitant because I know you're an NHS expert, but the problems that the NHS is going to face in the coming years are enormous, and the public finances implications are going to be enormous, and we're going to have to find ways of funding the NHS on a budget we haven't ever had to worry about before. It's going to be enormously expensive, and I think on the margins we are, as well as the taxpayer generally paying more, I think we're going to have to look at more co-payments of various kinds as well.
But
so I'm confirming myself as a right-wing Tory bastard now, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Listen, I've got, I understand that I pay prescription charges now and I don't particularly mind paying them, but I'm not in favour of sort of whittling away further the free provision on the NHS, because although Ed may be very healthy, what is clear is that once you start getting over 60, which of course I will get to next year, you are going to start getting into ill health. And the worst thing probably you can do for the NHS is to discourage people from getting the medication that they need at the time at which they need it. I mean, that's going to be an utterly false economy, as well as being a rolling back of some of the principles of the NHS. So, no, I think we should defend free prescriptions for over 60s.
Socialist.
Right, here's a nice one. Less of a question, but it's a good one, as you'll see. Dear Ian and Jackie, inspired by the book of counterfactuals that has been published this week, I've decided to throw some ideas together for my own, just for fun, as I'm in isolation, bless. My question is, should I write a counterfactual based on Change UK actually making a breakthrough after a rather rocky start and genuinely threatening the establishment? I have put a rough draft of the opening paragraphs below to hopefully whet the appetite. So this is from Tim. He says...
What's a nice name?
Yes, very nice name. It has been 3 months since the 7 Labour MPs sensationally strutted across the floor to launch the new political force. They were quickly followed by 3 Tories and a further Labour MP to create 11 powerful crusaders. They have already lost 2 of these luminary parliamentarians. Angela Smith raised eyebrows when she actually decided to trigger a by-election following her funny tinge comment on the Daily Politics.
I remember that.
She came a poor third after forgetting the name of her constituency at a hustings. Chuka lost the whip after he was recorded criticising interim leader Mike Gapes at his local Pret. Not. It's quite good.
That's good.
It's good,
a
isn't
little
it?
detail,
No,
nice, yeah.
Not the best of starts for this new political Goliath. Hope springs eternal. Time to regroup and take stock. It's the launch of the European election campaign. The candidates are lined up waiting. The big announcement for the top of the list of candidates is pending. Mike Gapes takes to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to reveal the new face of our movement. Oh, sorry, but it's time to reveal the new face of our movement. Somebody with a track record of winning and delivering. Somebody with the finest Europhile credentials. An elder statesperson. The top of our list for the West Midlands region. Baroness Jackie Smith. It is at this moment that the former Home Secretary takes to the stage, draped in an embroidered EU flag. The crowd erupts. The work of real political change has begun. See, it could all have been so different, Tim, couldn't it, if I hadn't been quite so unwilling to turn my back on my political party.
It would have been a new golden era in British history. The Jackie Smith age would have been compared to the Elizabethan age. It would have been an extraordinary period.
Extraordinary is one word for it. Yes. Right. Now we are coming to the end now, but we
goodness.
always. Thank goodness you've escaped reasonably well. But I'm now going to. I'm trying to find the one that Ian sent me, where I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. We might have to do it when Ian's back. I've done nice birthdays to people.
I'm just glad we didn't have to sing Happy Birthday.
I've got
flick that on your listeners.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't do that. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I was a choir boy though. You won't be probably surprised to hear that either. But I've not got too bad a voice.
Were you? Was it in the cathedral in Salisbury?
No, it was in the army church, the Garrison Church. Yeah.
Oh, right.
I had blonde hair. I was angelic once, you know.
I can see it. Lovely. Right, so this is where we do a little bit of agony aunting, Tim, all right. So this person says, Dear Ian, and it's anonymous for reasons you will see. I'm a big fan of For the Many from the... Oh, whoops, shit. Sorry to say shit.
Language,
Oh, fuck. Oh, no. I know that you take the time to read listener emails and often offer some sage advice, so I thought I'd write in. So this person, I'm not going to say what jobs he does because that might identify him, but he works essentially in a sort of think tank. He says, in this line of work, contacts appear to be key, which is a real problem for an extreme introvert like me. And I know my crippling shyness has held me back. I know you also say that you are an introvert, that's Ian I think he's talking to there, and that nobody believes you. I was wondering if you had any strategies for dealing with this problem. I was recently asked back to my old university to speak. The students wanted to know how to get into NGOs, politics, think tanks, etc. I told them it was all about networking, and my successes have come about largely through the very limited networking I've done. I offered them a few tips to get out there and network effectively. 1, attend lots of events and always ask a question during the Q&A, and where possible follow up with the speaker afterwards. 2, try to sit or stand away from people you already know. Force yourself to speak to strangers. Could you suggest any other tips for networking or putting yourself out there? I will certainly use any advice myself and pass it on. And these recommendations might also be useful for the many listeners. So happy for you and Jackie to use this as a question, but please keep me anonymous. So I have kept him anonymous. Tim, you must be... What are your tips for all of those keen For the Many listeners who want to get on in politics or in the sort of areas that you've got on in terms of networking?
I don't know, but I remember when I was at X-University, I went up to a function where there was all these, I was a university student, I remember I had my Thatcher poster on my wall, of course, and I think I must have been the youngest person at this gathering of pretty heavyweight Tories by 20, 30 years. And I had I was just in awe, but I was sort of frozen to the spot. I didn't know what to do. And I remember Lord McCall. Do you remember Lord McCall? He was still in the House of Lords now. He was John Major's parliamentary private secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up to me. He obviously knew the situation. You could see this, nervous man, young guy. And he walked me around the room, introducing me to people. And I will always remember that as a really beautiful thing to have done, because he could have just enjoyed himself and in a network. And so it's not really an answer to the question, but I have tried to do that ever since, because I met people that day that I thought, it was one of the most, for a young political geek, he made that an incredibly special occasion for me. I was completely incapable of doing it myself. And I do now try and do it when I see a young guy or someone who's clearly, not got the confidence that your correspondent had. And I try and do that now. And I suppose just in trying to help people deal with that, I encourage other people to do it as well. Look out for the person in the room who clearly is there because they believe in the gathering's purpose, but clearly is unable or struggling to network.
I think that is brilliant. I mean, his advice is really, he claims he's an introvert, but actually his advice is really, really good.
Yeah, it's good, yeah.
And actually, I think you could even, it takes a bit of gumption, but if there is somebody that who is more senior, why not ask them to introduce you to people?
Yeah, maybe that's the way of,
Because actually people, when people ask me that, I feel really honoured and I think, of course I'll do that. And I do try and, like you say, I do try and do it anyway, because I think people need championing. But that would be a really, really good thing to do. Yeah. We're going to just finish with a nun joke. Because we have done this one before, but it is one of my favourites, which Ian has passed to me. And this is from Tom, who sent us this nun joke. A nun is taking a bath and hears a knock on the door. The nun asks, "Who is it?" A man replies, "It's the blind man." Thinking, "Oh, he's blind, what harm could it do?" She then responds, "Come on in." A man comes through the door with a utility belt around his waist and a tape measure in hand. He looks at the nun and says, "Nice tits. Now where do you want these blinds?" So, bringing the podcast down to a suitable level to finish, are you up to anything this week, Tim, that you would like our listeners to know about? This is your chance to advertise yourself.
Well, I've got 2 funerals next week. No, I think I'm not going to have the happiest of weeks. Although actually funerals are a mixed occasion, aren't they? Because obviously there's a sadness, but it's often a time you reunite with people you haven't seen for a long time, and so and there's a new wine bar opened in Salisbury, so I should be visiting that on Tuesday. But I'm afraid otherwise it's going to be a bit of a downbeat week for me. Well,
there's obviously a wine bar time of the year, because I'm going to a new wine bar that's just opened in Great Malvern this evening, Bar Limon. So I hope that's going to be nice. And I'm on Jeremy Vine on Tuesday, if anybody is interested. And next week, which is Ian's second week away, my podcast partner will be Grant Tucker. So he can compete with you, Tim, for who's going to finally oust Ian from the podcast.
do you think he might? I think he might be better at the smut than me.
I think he might be.
Is that smearing him?
I think he might be a cheeky little monkey, and we'll get the chance to find.
I shall listen in.
Okay.
So you're marrying him then next week? So we are already divorcing. Our marriage has lasted about an hour and 20 minutes.
No, I'm going for a bit of polygamy. I've decided I'm going to change my religion to one that allows polygamy, and there we go.
Page 3 boy, I feel very sorry for him.
Tim, thank you for being such a good sport and for filling Ian's very big shoes admirably, which means you must have very big feet, and there is definitely a bit of smut in that. But we won't go there. We will bring the podcast to a close. Thank you everybody for listening, and don't forget to listen again next week, and cheerio, and thank you, Tim.
Bye.
You've been listening to a Global Original podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave a review wherever you get your podcasts from, as it helps other people to find us. I host 5 other podcasts which I hope you might like to try too. Ian Dale All Talk, the Ian Dale Book Club, The Prime Minister's, Cross Question, and Ian Dale The Whole Show. And of course you can listen to my LBC show live from 7 to 10 p.m. Monday to Thursday on FM in London, on digital radio, or all over the world on Global Player or your smart speaker. See you next time. Goodbye.